My name is Jessica Farrell. I am a pharmacist. I work in a large private practice, the Center for Rheumatology, which is in upstate New York in Albany. Well, we have quite a few offices now, but we have 3 offices, Albany, Glenville, and Saratoga, and then a satellite office up in the Adirondacks. So I work with about, I think we're up to almost 20 providers now, so rheumatologists and physicians and physician assistants and nurse practitioners and me. So my job is really to help with anything medication related. I work with our Scleroderma patients, but I also work with all of our patients. So I provide education, counseling, so face-to-face, one-on-one counseling with patients when needed, especially for those that are starting drugs that are they have lots of questions on. They didn't feel like they got enough time with their provider to talk about. They might have a unique administration, so an injectable drug. We set up individual visits, and I talk to them a lot about medication safety. So nowadays there is a lot of direct-to-consumer advertising. So there's commercials, there's websites, there's ads popping up all over the place on the internet, and it can be very overwhelming. Our local pharmacies are extremely busy and tend to not have specialized education or experience in patients with rheumatic disease, and especially not with scleroderma. So the information that they learn in pharmacy school and as a pharmacist in the general population, they often aren't able to kind of condense that and extrapolate it to a scleroderma patient. So my job is to really help the patients recognize that. So if they get misinformation from another healthcare provider, it's really related to education and the rarity of the disease, but then also helping them find ways and how to decipher and how to digest some of the information. So we thought that this talk would be really helpful in terms of how to find reliable information on the internet, because we have so much information available to us now, and it can be so overwhelming. The first thing that I do with my patients when I meet with them, if I'm talking about a specific drug, I say, what do you know about the drug? And they may remember something from their visit with their provider that was, a couple minutes discussion. They may have had a lengthier discussion with their provider. They may have went home and looked on the internet and then got incredibly overwhelmed. They may have turned on the TV and then heard a commercial that says, this drug will help you, but for 5 minutes about all the negative things that can happen. Or they may have had a friend or a family member who had been on the medication and had a bad experience, was on it for something different. So we're going to talk about some different resources that you can use, references and information on the internet, some limitations to those things that might be helpful to you. And most of the information that I'm going to talk in the first part is very general, so it can be used for medical information in general, so not specific to scleroderma, but we'll get into some more rheumatology-specific resources towards the end. So just what we're going to talk about today is just a brief explanation of evidence-based medicine, what that means. We'll talk about some resources, and we'll talk about some tips and tricks. So I really like this from both a student perspective and then from a patient's perspective, so that you understand, as a medical professional, how do we digest our information and get our information from the different studies that are done, from you can see down here, and when you're evaluating information, it's important to try to figure out where on this pyramid is that information. So if we have a background information, an expert opinion. So that is really our lowest level of evidence. So it's a clinician who has not studied a particular area, and just based on experience, that's their opinion. So although that can be really good, especially in a scleroderma population, it is considered fairly low level. Generally, they're getting their expert opinion also from some of these things up in this higher tier. So we have case studies, case series, and case reports, which are published in the medical literature. They can be single case reports, so one patient, so a doctor will have an experience and a treatment that worked or didn't work, and they will publish that. It's peer reviewed, meaning that it's reviewed by other physicians or other clinicians in that specialty area. So that's good. And sometimes we'll have case series where there's multiple patients in the publication. And as we add more numbers, obviously the validity and the reliability of that information improves. And same as we go up through the list. So randomized controlled trials are the trials designed before they even start enrolling patients. So they have an idea, they want to see if X drug is going to work for X disease, and they will randomize patients in that, and that randomization process, so some people get the drug, some people don't get the drug, that really helps to weed out some bias. And generally the investigators are blinded to that. So they can't say like, oh, I know you're on this drug and it's working for you. The patient doesn't know either. So that really lets us see, okay, we know that this is, here's the result at the end, and this group did better. And there's no bias of personal opinion or expert opinion kind of in that. There are certainly limitations to it, but it is a good way to get medical information. And then as we go up, these are articles that look at all of this together over many years, and they analyze it and review it and may put statistical testing to it to weed out what is real and what might have happened by chance. And when we're looking at all of this information together, this is kind of a better, higher quality of evidence. So in our scleroderma patients, we might have only a handful of studies that are in this range because it is hard to do a randomized controlled trial with a lot of scleroderma patients. But when we have enough of this, we then can look at it all as a whole and analyze it. And this is where your physicians and your providers are getting a lot of their information from. So that makes sense in terms of how we evaluate medical information.
It makes sense, but just one quick question as far as what happens in pediatrics, because I know that they don't randomize in pediatrics.
So so that's a good question related to pediatric patients. So there are some randomized studies in pediatrics, but it's very, very, very small. As a mother, you have to decide, or a parent, you have to decide, like, do I want to enroll my child? I'm making the decision for my child. Do I want to enroll them into a clinical trial where they may get better, or we're experimenting to see like what will happen? And most parents will not do that. So it becomes even harder because a lot of the evidence and literature that we have in pediatric patients is case-based information and experience-based. Hopefully pediatricians are, if they're able to work in an academic setting, they're publishing what their experience is so that other pediatricians and providers can start to utilize some of that information, and that kind of keeps growing. But it's very hard in pediatric population because you also have to think about it from an ethical perspective. We know we don't have as many placebo-controlled studies anymore because we know certain drugs work. So we tend to try to be studying them against, what has been used previously, so standard of care, to a new option, so that they're not getting nothing because there's an ethical concern there. So when we look at this is really if you are reading medical papers, if you're at that level, how to digest some of that information in terms of quality of evidence. So if you Google, a certain disease state, if you Google, a medication, there is thousands and thousands of hits and things that come up. And that is incredibly overwhelming. And you'd hope that the best information is towards the top of your Google search, but that might not always be the case. So what I have here first is this is related to disease state information. So there are a couple different resources that are fairly well-known and reliable sources of current affairs and medical literature, medical disease states, including medications, and kind of what we refer to as medical news. So MedPage is a good resource. So as a clinician, what's beneficial to it is that you can, or even as a patient, you can subscribe and have emails come daily. You can choose to filter it. So if there's certain disease states that are more relevant to you, you can filter it and put preferences. So every day you get kind of a table of contents of news that has happened, studies that have been published. It is geared towards the physician and higher education patient level. So if it's something that you're not as familiar with medical jargon, you have to kind of get used to that and learn before you can utilize that resource. The benefit is that it is physician reviewed, so they often are interviewing physicians about studies that they have done, so that's good. And there's a lot of variety of information on that resource. We'll talk about some limitations on the next page. The NIH, or National Institute of Health, is a government-sponsored resource. So they have lots and lots of databases and references that we'll talk to throughout. And this is a government-regulated resource. So the information is very reliable in terms of it's coming from research that's done at the National Institute of Health. The magazine, so Medline plus the magazine, is another thing that you can subscribe to, get emails, use it as kind of like current affairs and medicine. It's helpful to patients if they just are interested in medicine in general. You can search it, I think, but it's very limited in terms of being able to search it for specific information. But it will talk about the people and do profiles of people living with the disease. So it's kind of a little bit more lifestyle-ish. MedWatch is the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration's database for adverse drug events, and it is a place where consumers and physicians can go and report adverse events to drugs, and that gets filtered into a database. And as a clinician, that is very, very important for us to report things that happen with drugs that we really truly think are associated with the drug. The problem with the consumer aspect of it is that anyone can go on and report, like, oh, I had diarrhea with this drug. Okay, is that, do we already know that? They can report more severe side effects, but it's coming from the patient and not having been evaluated by a clinician to say, like, do we truly think this is related to the medication, or is it related to an underlying disease state? So that's something to take in consideration. We'll show you like some screenshots. So MedPage is a little bit more easy on the eyes. It's more news-like. You're going to see pictures and headlines. Medline Plus is truly a magazine, so you download the issue, you can sift through past issues. And then MedWatch, so out of all of the websites, I have to say the FDA websites are the most clunky, I would say, to get through. And they're not super appealing to the eye, so some people are like, oh, there's too many words. So that might be not as appealing to search through. In terms of limitations, so I mentioned this a little bit already, but MedPage articles are written by medical writers. So they are not physicians that are writing the articles, they are medical writers. So like I said, it's kind of geared towards both providers, clinicians, and patients. But you have to recognize that there is potential for some bias there or misinterpretation because it's a medical writer. But the bias is somewhat limited because it is reviewed by clinicians. Medline, I mentioned that you can download and search through some past issues for like the table of contents, but you can't actually search, like put in a keyword and search, so that's a limitation. And then, like I mentioned, the MedWatch page can be a little bit too technical and a little bit too not as appealing for the eyes to sift through. Patient information resources, so drug-related information. So there's lots of references that are available that talk about medication information, and that can be overwhelming. So there is the FDA website, which I'll show you very briefly, if I can get it to work, kind of what it looks like. So the FDA information, again, can be overwhelming because it really just links you out to the manufacturer's prescribing information. So it is going to download a PDF that's a lot of information, and there is a medication information guide that's focused towards patients. But keeping in mind in the scleroderma population, and we talked about this in other sessions, that the drug is generally not approved for scleroderma. So the information that's included in the prescribing information is focused on what they've seen in patients that have the disease that the drug is indicated for. And it's all lumped together. And there could be multiple disease states, and there could be multiple dosing ranges that are used. So that can be a limitation because it's all lumped together. If anyone's ever picked up a prescription from the pharmacy and looked at the handout that they give you in the letters that are, it's this long, and the letters, you need a microphone, a magnifying glass to look at it. It's lumping everything together for every disease state, every dose, and it really doesn't give you that relevance. So how is this relevant to my patient, me as a patient, or my child as a patient, and the dose that they're on? It doesn't spell that out. So those are some limitations as a consumer when you're looking through some of that information. Same with the drug information portal. It's a U.S. Library of Medicine, National Medicine, Library of Medicine, and it is a government-sponsored resource. Again, it's a lot of the same information, but it's just displayed in a different manner. So you can compare between different resources. You can choose the database that you feel is most conducive and quick access for you, that is reliable. Drugs.com comes up, and we'll talk about some limitations with that in a minute. I'm sure that's probably the one that people use most often, and there are some limitations to that reference, but that's usually the number one that comes up. And then RX List is another one too. So the FDA website talked a little bit about this already. It can be overwhelming because it's a lot of information. It might not be relevant to the particular disease state. The drug information portal from the National Library of Medicine also can be overwhelming because it does link out to other national or governmental websites. So it kind of links you to different websites. So it's opening multiple pages. So again, it can almost be like a rabbit hole. You click and then more information and more information. So it can get overwhelming. Drugs.com, again, is very similar to the other ones where they're lumping everything all together. So in terms of side effects, common side effects that are listed might be common for the particular disease state that the drug's approved in, but not to you as the patient or your child as the patient. So you have to keep that in mind. And then RX List is the one that's owned by WebMD. And although WebMD can be helpful, you have to be very careful in terms of the context. It's very basic information. I think from a liability standpoint, it is very basic for a reason. And in my opinion, I don't find it too helpful because there really isn't that relevance to our patient population. So I thought this would be helpful because I help a lot with access to medications because they are so expensive. And we have, you may have insurance and patients may have insurance, but they still have trouble affording their medications, or their medication is not approved because it's considered off-label. When you have rare conditions, many times the insurance doesn't want to pay for it because it's not recognized. But what are our options? We need to still treat our patients. So we have lots of different resources here, and all of this is in the handout, so you can refer to that and kind of click through the different databases. I love Needy Meds because it's almost like a Google for patient assistance programs. So it'll even give you, I've even used it for family members who don't have any insurance and need like a free clinic to go to. So they have medication assistance programs. It's like a searchable database. You put in the drug name, like if you put in Cellcept, you'd put that in, and then it'll give you a list, and it gives you eligibility criteria also. So are you eligible based on, do you have commercial insurance? Do you have governmental insurance? Do you have no insurance? Do you make a certain amount of money? It kind of lists all that right there. So that's very helpful. And then it'll link you to the application or application form. So I find that to be a really good resource. GoodRx we use it when, so there are some limitations to it, but we'll use it when patients have a copay that's just too high or the medication is not covered at all, and it tends to be a reasonably priced medication through a pharmacy paying cash. With the coupon, it might bring it down a little bit. You can kind of shop around. The problem is that sometimes the price that's quoted on GoodRx is not exactly the price that you get when you get to the pharmacy. So you have to be a little weary of that, and it can be a trial and error process. You also have to be careful when you print out when you're picking the drug, you have to pick the right dose and the right quantity for it to give you the accurate price. So in drugs that there are multiple formulations, so like Cellcept comes in multiple formulations and multiple strengths, you have to be careful that you're picking the right number and picking the right right dosage form and the right quantity. Partnership for Prescription Assistance is a national resource. Same with PAN. So these ones are other options to look through to see if there are assistance based on your current scenario. The HealthWell Foundation, we use this a lot too. So they have sums of money that they're able to distribute. Usually it's an application process. So none of these come without a little effort. But if you're able to get a good coverage and good some assistance, I think it's worthwhile. And then for our patients, I use this as an example. Some of the pharmaceutical companies have foundations, and they will help support the cost of the drug or even give free drug. So Genentech being a good one because we use a lot of Cellcept, and they're all companies, most companies do have foundations that are part of them that will help cover medications for patients that have been denied access through their insurance. But again, application process. But we have gotten quite a few patients free Cellcept through those pathways. So. Disease state information and medical conditions. So here are another list of a couple different resources. Instead of using WebMD, these would be my preferred options. So they all have their benefits, and the way they're organizing the information is a little bit different, but for the most part it's very much physician reviewed, peer reviewed process. So it's a foundation with a advisory board of group of physicians that is reviewing the information and making sure it's accurate. Mayo Clinic is a very good resource. JAMA Network. So this one is I really like the ease of the website. It's easy to navigate. So you can also choose preferences to the types of information you want to see related to certain disease states, certain news. Merck Manuals, it is sponsored by Merck, so you have to be cautious of that bias, but it does have a board that is reviewing it. And then Family Doctor is another resource, which is good because I think there's more pediatric information there too. Patient-focused blogs. So blogs can be helpful. They can be really beneficial to patients and parents who are looking for information and just want that support. They can be dangerous because they are not usually monitored by a clinician, so there can be lots of information exchanged there, which is from a patient's perspective. And we all know, if you put 10 scleroderma patients in a room together, that they all look very different. So you have to keep that in mind because, one patient's experience with a drug with scleroderma might be very different than another because their disease is slightly different, even though they're under the umbrella of scleroderma. So that's important to keep in mind when you're reading through blogs. There are some blogs that are created by physicians, so that are helpful and reliable information from a physician standpoint. But again, it's one single person's opinion, and generally, even if it is a clinician or a physician, it's not likely peer reviewed. So you do have to be careful with that. But it's a great way to feel connected, to have this sense of community. That's why I love the Scleroderma Foundation so much, is because it's, I feel that sense of community with the group. It's a small group, and it really is beneficial from, just digesting all this information that we're getting. So it can be very helpful from that regard. Searchable portals, so Medline Plus, which is another one of the governmental databases, is linking the National Library of Medicine and the NIH. It's kind of all together. So it's, again, a little bit more information. It's all coming from, it's peer reviewed. It's going to include NIH-sponsored research. So it is a searchable database. Health on the Net Foundation. This is a non-for-profit organization, and again, it's has a board, is peer reviewed. The peer review process is really important when you're searching through some of these different databases and resources to find out that it's not just one person that is putting all this information on a website. And then healthfinder.gov is also helpful. Rheumatology-specific resources, so there are quite a few, ones focused for scleroderma patients. I think most of the group here is probably familiar with those. So the Scleroderma Foundation is a very, very wonderful resource and has been expanding over the years. I've been involved with the Scleroderma Foundation for almost 10 years now, and I've seen the growth of the level of information and the amount of information that they have on the website, and it is really the best place for our patients. And it is peer reviewed, so we have the advisory board, which I'm part of now. I've been involved with the patient education committee to help with some of those documents that are listed on the website. So they get peer reviewed, they're filtered. It's not just one single person's opinion that's going in those references. Some scleroderma centers across the country will have various level of references and resources on their websites. You can certainly borrow from others, so just because you don't go to U of Michigan's scleroderma group, you can certainly use some of the resources on their website, or Johns Hopkins has a really great one, Hospital Special Surgery. So these are just to name a few of them. They have different levels of amount of information on their websites. American College of Rheumatology, or the Scleroderma Research Foundation, that can be helpful if you want to learn more about what studies are being done, what research is being done, if you're candidates or you're, can be enrolled in some of the studies. American College of Rheumatology is limited because they kind of defer to the Scleroderma Foundation, so they have a little bit of information. They have some helpful documents that talk about, that might be good for giving to other providers, so people who don't know that much about scleroderma. If you need to educate them, that would probably be a good, you can pull down the What is Scleroderma handout and give that to your primary care doctor or your pediatrician if it's a new, they're not aware about the condition, to help them learn more about it. Room Info, Room Doctor, and Creaky Joints are three different websites that are very focused on rheumatology in general. In regards to the level of information of scleroderma that's on them, it can be variable. They are run by rheumatologists and I believe most of them have a peer review process. RoomDoctor.com is from one of my rheumatologists, so it at this point doesn't have a peer review process. She is an excellent rheumatologist that she runs the blog, but again, it's a blog, and it is may have guest posts and guest, people that are posting on there. But again, it's one person's kind of opinion. So keeping those things in mind. So tips and tricks. So here are a couple different resources that are available to kind of sift through, and how do you digest this information? How do you become more literate in health information? So depending on whether you're a patient or a parent of a patient, you have to very, very quickly get up to date in the medical jargon and learn about, what do these words mean? It's generally, if you don't have medicine background, it's like a foreign language. When I started in pharmacy school, I was like, is everyone speaking French? Because that's kind of what it sounds like. You have to learn the information, and it does take some time. So these are really good resources that you can go to. They're training guides, like how do you decipher it all, and how do you become, like, what are these common medical terms really mean? And those can be good resources for you to refer back to, even over the course of the time that you're researching different aspects of your or your child's disease. So those can be helpful. So considering the source. So when you're on a particular website, the internet can be a rabbit hole. Who knows where you end up. And it's really important to, if you feel like you found a reliable resource, take a look at the About Us section. So does it have information? Does it have details? Is it a non-for-profit organization? Is it a for-profit organization? Where does the funding come from? Those types of things. Is there an advisory board? Is there a peer review process to what gets published on the website? How often is it updated? That's another thing. So it's helpful to have, updated when, date at the bottom when, data is put on, a particular website, or information is put on a particular website. So those things can be important. Is it run by a branch of the government, a university, a health associate organization, a hospital, a business? These types of things can help you decipher, how reliable is this information, and should I trust it or not? Focus on quality. I mentioned this already. Editorial board, is someone, just able to post onto the site, or is there an editorial process, like that peer review process I mentioned? And how often is it updated? And be skeptical. So I think this is important, because it is, if it sounds too good to be true, it might be. Hopefully not, but you can't believe everything that you read. So it is really important to kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So key points, like I said, there is lots and lots of information available. There are good resources and bad resources, not to say that you can't use both for certain reasons. So good and bad is subjective. So it might be good information for, your mental health and having that support group, but it might not be the best place to get up to date, medical information. So keeping that in mind. And, this is by far, I think, the biggest point, is that, certainly, now that we have, these websites available, lots of people go and Google their symptoms before they even see a doctor. So, and then they go to the doctor and it's like, I think I have this. So, keeping in mind, like, yes, you need to be your own advocate. You need to, you need to learn about the disease, and you need to be educated about it. But, that information on the internet should certainly not replace your healthcare provider. And, that's probably preaching to the choir with this group, but, keeping that in mind, and, that type of thing. So, I know that's kind of a lot of information. It's a big picture overview, but everyone has a very different scenario in terms of level of education, level of where they are with the disease, whether you're a parent or you have the disease, and how long have you had it. Have you, lived through the, new developments and the new information? Do you have that history with the disease, or are you brand new to the disease? So utilizing these different resources can, help you get more comfortable depending on what stage you are at.